9:17 a.m. The Sea of Japan. Overcast. Cloud ceiling at 4,000 feet, gray and flat, pressing down on a heavy swell running northeast at 3 meters. Visibility, 8 nautical miles. The kind of day where the sea looks like hammered pewter and the horizon bleeds into the sky without a clean edge. And everything between water and cloud belongs to the gray. Through that gray, cutting her way northwest at 17 knots, was the USS Ronald Reagan, CVN 76. Her flight deck was quiet, the weather was marginal for flight ops, and the morning's first launch had been delayed pending a clearance window. Her crew of 5,300 men and women was at their duty stations. Coffee was being drunk. Reports were being written. In the carrier's Combat Information Center, the watch team was monitoring the standard feed of contacts, the routine of a Thursday morning at sea, the particular calm that comes with operating in waters you have operated in 100 times before. 41 miles to the northwest, beneath the surface of that pewter sea, something was not calm at all. The Korean People's Navy had spent 4 years building what its submarine arm called the Dawn Fist program. The concept had been simple in conception and brutal in execution. Acquire, modify, and crew a force of Romeo-class and Sinpo-class submarines capable of executing a coordinated ambush against a United States Navy carrier in the approaches to the Korean Peninsula. The theoretical basis was drawn from Soviet Cold War doctrine, the idea that if you could position enough submarines in the carrier's path before it was aware of the threat, you could overwhelm its anti-submarine warfare screen with simultaneous attacks from multiple vectors. 4 years of preparation, 312 submarine personnel trained specifically for this mission, 2 years of covert repositioning operations, moving submarines out of Wonsan and Myeongdo naval bases in small groups under weather cover and emissions silence, using the acoustic shadow of the Korean coastline to mask their transit south and east into the Sea of Japan. And on this gray Thursday morning, the trap was set. 6 submarines, arranged in a modified fan formation across a 22-mile front. 3 Sinpo-class submarines, the most capable vessels the Korean People's Navy possessed, each carrying 4 heavyweight torpedoes, holding at periscope depth in the northern arc. 3 Romeo-class submarines in the southern arc, older and louder but still carrying 8 torpedoes each and capable of contributing a lethal volume of fire to a compressed attack window. 36 torpedoes total. All 6 submarines in firing position. All 6 commanding officers holding their breath. The plan required simultaneity. All 6 submarines would fire within a 90-second window. 12 torpedoes inbound from the north, 12 from the south. 24 weapons in the water simultaneously, approaching from angles that the Reagan's escorts would have to split their attention across. The escort screen, normally consisting of 2 or 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers, could not engage 24 simultaneous torpedo tracks. The mathematics of anti-torpedo defense had been worked through by the KPN's Soviet-trained planning staff until they were confident. 6 submarines against 1 carrier and her screen. At least 1 torpedo would get through. Perhaps more. 1 torpedo from a heavyweight weapon against a carrier was not guaranteed to sink it, but it was guaranteed to stop it, to flood compartments, to kill sailors, to send a message to Washington that the Sea of Japan was contested water. That was the goal. Not to sink the Reagan, to wound her, to humiliate her, to prove that the Korean People's Navy could reach out and touch the most powerful warship on Earth. The KPN submarine force commander, operating from a hardened command facility beneath Wonsan, gave the attack authorization at 9:17 a.m. The 6 commanding officers acknowledged. Targeting solutions were confirmed. Torpedo tube outer doors began to open. They had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: they believed their 4-year preparation had been conducted in secrecy. It had not. The National Security Agency's collection assets monitoring Korean People's Navy encrypted communications had flagged the Dawn Fist program 26 months after it began. SIGINT analysis had identified the pattern of unusual submarine crew assignments, the abnormal training activity at the Myeongdo torpedo testing range, and the encrypted operational communications that suggested a major submarine operation was being planned and rehearsed. That intelligence had been shared with Pacific Fleet and had driven a quiet but significant change in how the Reagan strike group operated in the Sea of Japan. The number of P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft assigned to the theater had tripled. The sonobuoy resupply cadence had doubled, and the standing orders for the strike group's assigned submarine escort had been rewritten to prioritize active anti-submarine operations over passive monitoring. The second mistake: they did not know about USS Springfield. The Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine had been assigned to the Reagan strike group as an undersea escort 6 weeks earlier, a deployment that had been classified at the highest level and had not appeared in any open-source order of battle document. USS Springfield had been conducting active sonar prosecution of the Sea of Japan submarine approaches for the previous 19 days. She had first detected acoustic contacts consistent with a Sinpo-class submarine 18 days ago. She had been tracking all 6 contacts, with varying degrees of confidence, for 11 days. Her commanding officer had reported to Pacific Fleet that he assessed a coordinated KPN submarine ambush was being prepared. Pacific Fleet had assessed his report as high confidence. The Reagan's commanding officer had been briefed 4 days ago. The third mistake: the Romeo-class submarines in the Southern Arc were leaking. Not water, sound. The Romeo-class was a 1950s Soviet design, built under license in North Korea from plans acquired in the 1970s. Its machinery spaces produced a distinctive acoustic signature that had been in the U.S. Navy's acoustic intelligence database since 1981. Decades of operations had not made the Romeo quieter. 3 Romeo-class submarines attempting to maintain station at periscope depth in a 3-meter swell, their ballast systems cycling, their diesel engines on standby, their hulls working against the sea state, were generating a combined acoustic signature that the passive sonar operators aboard USS Springfield were tracking with a confidence level they described in their logs as excellent. The fourth mistake: the KPN's torpedo approach geometry, the fan formation designed to present simultaneous threats from multiple vectors, required all 6 submarines to be within a specific range band of the carrier at the moment of firing. That range band was between 8 and 12 nautical miles. At ranges shorter than 8 miles, the carrier's close-in torpedo defense systems became effective. At ranges greater than 12 miles, the torpedo's fuel endurance margin was insufficient to guarantee weapon delivery against a maneuvering target. The 6 submarine fan formation, by operational necessity, had to compress into that specific range band as the Reagan approached. And a submarine moving to a firing position is louder than a submarine holding still. The fifth mistake, and it was the one that ended everything before it began, was that the KPN submarines had opened their torpedo tube outer doors simultaneously at 9:17 a.m. Opening torpedo tube outer doors is an acoustic event. The water rushing into the tubes, the pressure equalization, the mechanical movement of the outer door mechanisms, all of it generates transient sounds that are distinct, identifiable, and unmistakable to a trained sonar operator who is already tracking the contact. On USS Springfield, the sonar supervisor heard the first transient at 9:17 a.m. and 4 seconds. He heard the second at 9:17 a.m. and 11 seconds. Then the third. Then all 6, within a 48-second window. He said one word to his commanding officer: weapons. What happened in the next 22 minutes defined the outcome completely. At 9:17 a.m. and 53 seconds, USS Springfield's commanding officer transmitted a single encrypted burst message to the Reagan's Combat Information Center on the strike group tactical net. 6 subsurface contacts, weapons free. Coordinates follow. The message arrived in the Reagan's CIC at 9:18 a.m. The coordinates for all 6 KPN submarines were attached. The air picture, the surface picture, and the subsurface picture resolved into a single tactical problem with a known solution. The Reagan's commanding officer immediately ordered, "Flight Ops emergency launch. All available anti-submarine aircraft, immediate." On the flight deck, 2 SH-60R Seahawk helicopters were already on the deck in 5-minute alert status, a posture that had been maintained continuously for the previous 4 days following the intelligence update. Their crews were in their cockpits. Their dipping sonars were stowed and ready. Their Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes were loaded. They were airborne in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Simultaneously, the Reagan's CIC transmitted the KPN submarine coordinates to the 2 P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft that had been orbiting at 12,000 feet 40 miles east of the strike group since 6 a.m. The P-8s had been on station specifically because of the submarine threat assessment. They turned northwest immediately, descended to 3,000 feet, and began pre-programming their sonobuoy drop patterns and weapons release solutions. USS Springfield had already fired. At 9:18 a.m. and 38 seconds after the torpedo tube outer door transients, USS Springfield's commanding officer fired 2 Mark 48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes at the northernmost Sinpo class contact. The Mark 48 travels at speeds exceeding 55 knots. At a range of 4 nautical miles, the distance to the northernmost contact, the torpedo's time of flight was less than 4 minutes. The KPN submarine's crew had not yet completed their own firing sequence when the first American torpedo arrived. The Sinpo class submarine never fired a weapon. At 9:18 a.m. and 44 seconds, USS Springfield fired 2 more Mark 48s at the second Sinpo class contact 7 miles to the northwest. Then 2 more at the third Sinpo at 9:19 a.m. and 8 seconds. Springfield had expended 6 of her torpedoes in less than 37 seconds. All 6 were in the water, running hot, straight, and normal toward their assigned targets. The KPN submarines, having heard the first American torpedo in the water, began attempting to take emergency evasion. But a submarine at periscope depth, in a 3-meter swell, committed to a firing position and not moving, is not in a good evasion posture. The Sinpo class, and a relatively modern vessel by KPN standards, could make 14 knots submerged. The Mark 48 could make over 55. The geometry was not favorable for evasion. The first Mark 48 found the northernmost Sinpo at 9:22 a.m. The acoustic signature of the detonation, a sharp, deep thump that propagated through the water column for 30 miles in every direction, was recorded by every sonar operator in the strike group simultaneously. The second Sinpo was struck at 9:23 a.m. and 41 seconds. The third at 9:24 a.m. and 17 seconds. All 3 Sinpo-class submarines were destroyed before any of them fired a single torpedo. The Romeo-class submarines in the Southern Arc had heard the torpedoes. They had heard the detonations. Their commanding officers were in a crisis they had not trained for. Their ambush had been ambushed. 2 of the 3 Romeo-class submarines began emergency deep dives, abandoning their firing solutions, attempting to use depth and speed to escape. The third, either from confusion, communication breakdown, or a commanding officer who chose to press the attack, actually fired 2 torpedoes. Old Soviet-era Type 53 weapons, slower and less sophisticated than the Mark 48, running toward the Reagan's last known position. The Reagan was no longer there. The moment USS Springfield's first torpedo alert had reached the CIC, the Reagan had gone to emergency flank speed and executed a hard turn to the southeast, increasing her distance from the threat bearing and simultaneously unmeshing herself from the torpedo's predicted intercept cone. The 2 Type 53 torpedoes, running at 45 knots toward where the Reagan had been, found nothing but open water and exhausted their fuel after approximately 12 nautical miles. The Romeo that had fired lasted 6 more minutes. The 2 SH-60R Seahawks arrived over the Southern Arc at 9:26 a.m. Their dipping sonars located the first Romeo at 9:28 a.m., still attempting an emergency dive. The Seahawk crew confirmed the contact is hostile, received weapons-free authorization from the CIC, and dropped a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo at 9:29 a.m. The Mark 54, though smaller than the Mark 48, has a sophisticated active/passive sonar seeker and a shaped charge warhead optimized for pressure hull penetration. It found the Romeo in 43 seconds. The second Romeo, the one that had fired the two Type 53 torpedoes, was located by the first P-8 Poseidon at 9:31 a.m. The P-8 dropped 4 sonobuoys in a localization pattern, refined its firing solution, and released a Mark 54 at 9:33 a.m. Impact at 9:34 a.m. The third Romeo had gone deep and was attempting to run northeast toward the Korean coastline. USS Springfield detached from its engagement of the Sinpo contacts, all 3 of which were confirmed killed, and prosecuted the third Romeo on passive sonar. The contact was fast enough and deep enough to make the prosecution complex. USS Springfield spent 11 minutes refining her firing solution. At 9:44 a.m., she fired 2 Mark 48s. Both found the contact. At 9:47 a.m., 30 minutes after the KPN submarine force commander had transmitted his attack authorization from his bunker beneath Wonsan, the Sea of Japan was quiet again. All 6 submarines of the Dawn Fist ambush force were on the bottom of the Sea of Japan. Not one KPN torpedo had reached its target. Not one. The Reagan had never stopped her turn to the southeast. She was now 31 miles from her original position, her speed dropping back to 17 knots. Her CIC confirming the all-clear from USS Springfield and the P-8 The flight deck resumed normal operations at 10:22 a.m. once the weather window opened. The first F/A-18 launched at 10:31 a.m. The response package had been pre-planned and was already executing before the last Romeo was confirmed killed. At 9:41 a.m., while USS Springfield was still prosecuting the third Romeo, Pacific Air Forces launched the strike from Osan Air Base in South Korea. 8 F-35As from the 35th Fighter Wing, carrying a combined load of 16 JASSMER cruise missiles and 40 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. Their targets were the 2 KPN submarine bases that had served as the staging points for the Dawn Fist operation, the submarine facility at Wonsan, and the Myeongdo Naval Base on the eastern coast. Wonsan submarine base had been in the U.S. targeting database for 30 years. Every pier, every maintenance facility, every fuel depot, every hardened submarine pen, all of it pre-assigned and preloaded into the F-35A mission computers before takeoff. The JASSMERs, released from standoff range over the Sea of Japan, flew their terrain-following approach through the valleys of the Taebaek Mountains and arrived over Wonsan at 10:09 a.m. 8 missiles, 8 assigned impact points. The submarine maintenance facility, the building where the torpedoes for the Dawn Fist submarines had been loaded and checked, was struck first. Then the pier infrastructure. Then the fuel storage complex that served the submarine force. Then the hardened pens on the northern side of the harbor, where 3 additional Romeo-class submarines sat at their berths. Those 3 submarines, which had not participated in the Dawn Fist operation, and whose crews were in various states of readiness, ranging from partial to minimal, were struck by GBU-39 small-diameter bombs released from 15 miles. The pens were reinforced concrete. The SDB penetrating warheads were not stopped by reinforced concrete. All 3 submarines were destroyed at their berths. Myeongdo was struck simultaneously by the second 4-ship flight of F-35As. The Sinpo-class submarine assembly and refit facility, where the 3 submarines that now sat on the bottom of the Sea of Japan had been prepared and crewed for the Dawn Fist operation, was struck by 8 JASSMERs in a pattern that collapsed every above-ground structure on the compound. The facility's underground component was penetrated by 4 GBU-31JDAMs with delayed fuse-penetrating warheads. The acoustic listening station at Myeongdo, which had provided the KPN with surface traffic monitoring of the Sea of Japan, was struck by 2 SDBs and ceased to function at 10:11 a.m. From the hardened command facility beneath Wonsan, the KPN submarine force commander attempted to transmit status requests to his 6 submarine commanding officers beginning at 9:22 a.m. the moment the first Mark 48 detonated. He received no response. He continued transmitting on emergency frequencies. Still no response. At 9:51 a.m., he transmitted a flash message to Korean People's Army General Staff Headquarters in Pyongyang, reporting contact lost with all 6 submarines. He was still in that bunker at 10:09 a.m. when the first JASSMER arrived. The command facility had been hardened against conventional aerial attack. It had not been specifically hardened against a weapon that flew around its radar coverage at terrain-following altitude and struck at a precisely calculated angle of impact. The JASSM warhead penetrated the facility's outer reinforced layer. It detonated in the command center. The Dawn Fist program's architect did not survive to learn that his submarines had not fired a single torpedo into an American ship. The final accounting compiled by Pacific Fleet over the subsequent 24 hours was comprehensive. KPN submarines destroyed, 6 of 6 committed to the operation, all on the bottom of the Sea of Japan. 3 additional Romeo-class submarines destroyed at their berths in Wonsan Harbor. Total KPN submarine force eliminated, 9 vessels, representing approximately 35% of the Korean People's Navy's entire operational submarine fleet. KPN naval facilities destroyed. The Wonsan submarine base, piers, maintenance facility, fuel complex, hardened pens. The Myeongdo refit and assembly facility. The Myeongdo acoustic monitoring station. The Dawn Fist command facility beneath Wonsan. KPN personnel casualties. 312 submarine crew members aboard the 6 ambush submarines. The entire trained Dawn Fist force killed. An additional estimated 40 to 60 personnel at Wonsan and Myeongdo facilities. The program's command staff killed. American casualties 0. Not 1 sailor wounded. Not 1 aircraft lost. The USS Ronald Reagan had not been struck by a single weapon. She had not slowed her operations for more than 1 hour and 9 minutes. In Pyongyang, state media went silent for 3 hours. Then broadcast a military march, then went silent again. The Korean People's Army General Staff issued no public statement about the loss of 9 submarines. The families of 312 sailors received no official notification. The Sea of Japan was quiet. USS Springfield was already moving to her next patrol station. The P-8s returned to Osan. The SH-60Rs were back on the Reagan's deck, being refueled and rearmed. The carrier's commanding officer filed his after-action report at 2 p.m. and noted that the strike group had performed every procedure within established parameters and that the outcome had been entirely consistent with what the intelligence and training had predicted. He recommended commendations for the crew of USS Springfield. He noted that the weather window had opened on schedule and that flight operations had resumed without significant delay. This is what happens when you spend 4 years preparing an ambush against a Navy that spends those same 4 years watching you prepare it. This is what happens when you position 6 submarines in the path of a carrier group and believe that the gray sea and the overcast sky are enough to hide you from the ears that have been listening since before your submarines left port. The Sea of Japan is deep and cold, and it keeps its secrets. But it kept none of the Korean People's Navy's secrets on this gray Thursday morning. It kept only the Dawn Fist submarines themselves, resting now on the bottom, in water too deep for salvage. 312 men who believed they were the trap. They were not the trap. They were the target. And the USS Ronald Reagan continued northwest at 17 knots, her flight deck busy, her crew at their stations, her radar turning into the gray.